Dear God, we thank you for the winsome ways that the bells speak to our hearts. Thank you for all the many ways we have in this rich church, meaning rich in joy, to celebrate all that is the best and the most meaningful in our lives. Amen. So I want to begin by reading a couple of paragraphs from a little bit of a quirky obituary of a man named Val Patterson that appeared in the Salt Lake Tribune about 10 years ago. And what's notable about it is that Val, who died, wrote every bit of it himself, except for the last three words in the first line. Here's how that part goes. I was born in Salt Lake City, March the 27th, 1953. I died of throat cancer on July the 10th, 2012. I enjoyed one good life. I traveled to every place on earth that I ever wanted to, had every job that I wanted to have, learned all that I wanted to learn, fixed everything I wanted to fix. I've eaten everything I wanted to eat. My life mottos were, if you can break it, I can fix it. And don't apply for a job, create one. I had three requirements for seeking a great job. 1, all glory. 2, top pay. 3, no work. My regret is that I felt invincible when young and smoked cigarettes when I knew they were bad for me. And now to make it worse, I have robbed my beloved wife, Mary Jane, of a decade or more of the two of us growing old together and laughing at all the thousands of simple things that we have come to enjoy and fill our lives with, such happy words and moments. Now that I have gone to my reward, I have confessions and things I should now say. As it turns out, I am the guy who stole the safe from the Motor View drive-in back in June 1971. I could have left that unsaid, but I wanted to get it off my chest. Also, I really am not a PhD. This is my favorite part. What happened was that the day I went to pay off my college loan at the University of Utah, the girl working there put my receipt in the wrong stack, and 2 weeks later, a deep PhD diploma came in the mail. I didn't even graduate. I only had about 3 years of college credit. In fact, I never did learn what the letters PhD even mean. For all of the electronic engineers I have worked with, I am sorry, but you have to admit my designs always worked very well and were well engineered, and I always made you laugh. Well, the whole obituary is very touching and very funny and apparently too true. Now, what does it take to write your own obituary when you are dying rather young, and to do it, as he did, with such humor and panache? I think it takes a certain amount of inborn grace. It takes, I think, what we now call emotional intelligence, and a sense that every day, no matter how long we live, is a gift, right? So I want to talk about that kind of intelligence a little. I want to discuss what it might take not just to live a meaningful life, but to finish well. I think that's what is at the heart of the text we heard today from 2 Timothy, from the not-so-Janet Cruz. Thank you, June. Writing from a Roman jail with suspicion that he would soon be dead, the Apostle Paul looked back at his remarkable life, and then he wrote his own epitaph. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for God's appearing. Was Paul afraid to die? Sure, probably some. Who isn't? But From this morning's text, I get the feeling he was saying goodbye to it all without any regrets. None. And it had clearly been a struggle, but Paul knows in his heart that he has indeed fought a very good, worthwhile fight. He has kept the faith when there were times when he must have thought it might be better to just give it up, and he has finished a long race. The now famous book, Mother Teresa, Come Be My Light, the private writings of the Saint of Calcutta, contains a revelation that was very surprising and garnered a tremendous amount of attention, if you remember. You may remember that Mother Teresa struggled with her faith and experienced a great deal of darkness for the last 50 years of her long and remarkable life. If I ever become a saint, she wrote, I will surely be one of darkness. Native Albania, she joined the Sisters of Loreto, a missionary organization, and was sent to Calcutta in 1929. She was assigned to the Bengali school for girls, where her superiors recognized her gifts immediately, her prayerfulness and compassion, charity, a natural talent for organization and leadership, presence of mind, common sense, and courage. She was a tiny woman, but she once chased away an angry bull in order to protect her girls, and another time she faced down a group of thieves trying to rob the convent. In the 1940s, she had a mystical experience in which she heard Jesus ask her to, quote, come be my light. And her response was, I will never refuse you. She made a vow to, quote, do something beautiful for God, unquote, and finally received permission to leave the Sisters of Loreto and found a new order, the Missionaries of Charity, whose mission was simply to bring the light of God's love to the poorest of the poor on the streets of Calcutta, which is exactly what she and the Missionaries of Charity did. Minister to the sick and the dying, the homeless, the forgotten, bringing a bit of compassion and dignity into lives that were totally lost and about to be over. Her work was so genuine and she was so guilelessly authentic that everyone who heard about her and met her concluded that if there ever was such a thing as a saint, it was certainly Mother Teresa. Well, early in my years of ministry, I read a book about her by Malcolm Muggeridge called Something Beautiful for God. And that book made her something of a celebrity, and she was eventually awarded the Nobel Prize, remember? Who would have known that all the while she was experiencing not the spiritual fullness and contentment and happiness that everyone expected, but instead doubt and emptiness and constant longing. Her personal journals and correspondence with her friends and superiors reveal a very brave woman doing remarkable things all the time, struggling, though, with darkness. Some of it is almost stream of consciousness, written to her spiritual director. Quote, the place of God in my soul is blank, she writes. I feel that God does not want me. Sometimes I just hear my heart cry out, my God, and nothing else comes. Well, some people criticized her posthumously. Some among the evangelical community especially found her darkness the equivalent of a lack of faith. Some of the outspoken atheists who sold so many books, back 20 years ago, gleefully rubbed their hands and said, aha, her experience of God's absence means there's nothing there, no God. We've been right all along. Martin Marty, a progressive Christian voice, said something else. He called the book sadly beautiful and beautifully sad. A Newsweek religion writer said he used to feel almost put off by Mother Teresa's perfection, but after these revelations, he said she was finally approachable. She was human after all. Her experience, I think, is actually a gift. A reminder that saintliness doesn't mean living with consistent, sustained certainty in a daily personal communion with God. No. She's a reminder that darkness is a part of faith, and that to be human is to doubt and experience spiritual emptiness and to struggle and do one's best to be brave despite the darkness that you and I all face. Now, what Mother Teresa didn't do was surrender, though, to that darkness. She did not become despondent and withdraw from her call. Instead, with amazing strength, she fought the fight. She continued to do what she believed God wanted her to do. She never stopped loving Jesus and trying to be God's light on earth. I will never refuse you, she had said at the outset, and her final dying words were simply, I have never refused you. That's what finishing the race is. Frederick Buechner once wrote, saints are not plastic statues, men and women of such paralyzing virtue that they never thought a nasty thought, never committed an evil act their whole life long. Saints, Buechner says, are essentially life givers. To be with them is to become more alive. Remember the theme that we're using as a banner over this November stewardship group of sermons? It's the words from St. Irenaeus. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor, whose church, the Episcopal Church, has kept the idea of saints alive, says, what makes a saint is extravagance. Excessive love, flagrant mercy, radical affection, exorbitant charity, immoderate faith, intemperate hope, inordinate love, and maybe a friendliness with darkness too. It's believing that life is so much more than putting up with a job you do for money 5 or 6 days a week for 40 years before you rest in the sun a little while and then pass away. The writer of the New Testament book called the Letter to the Hebrews speaks of life as an athletic event and exhorts us to remember the invisible beloved ones who are around us. Therefore, it says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, the writer wants us to envision ourselves as athletes in an arena, but he or she envisions a coliseum, in fact, like the one in Qatar, where the World Cup begins today, with the pitch in the middle and seats all around it. And that writer mentions a host of saints who were not all particularly saintly. Many started out in pretty dark places, in fact. The writer implies that it's not how you start out, it's how you finish the race that counts. It mentions a woman in the Bible named Rahab who aided the Hebrew spies Joshua and Caleb and who settled in the promised land. Poor Rahab started out as a prostitute, but she ended up in the family tree of Jesus. So again, it's not how you start out. How you finish up. Paul started out as a violent persecutor, but he ended up as the one most responsible for the survival of the Christian movement. It was touch and go his whole life. He was tempted to give it up many times, but as he himself said, he fought the good fight. He kept the faith. He finished the race. Last night we watched Bo Nix, right, on one good leg. Finish the race. That was really beautiful. I think it was the best game of the year. But boy, my heart was in my throat the whole time. Of course, to finish well, it helps to have spent your life doing something you can look back at with pride and a sense of accomplishment, right? As has often been said, it's a terrible thing to climb all the way to the top of a ladder and find out that it is leaning against the wrong wall. But even with that possibility, and there's always that possibility, a person can still open one's heart in a way that allows them to embrace their last years with grace and renewed purpose. It's never too late. The journalist / speechwriter Michael Gerson died a couple of days ago. He regretted a few speeches he'd written for George W. Bush, remember, about non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. But he kept his head on straight, and he helped me see in his journalism things more clearly that my liberal, democratic-leaning brain could sometimes be totally blind to. He finished well. Here's something on him from this morning's New York Times. Maybe you saw it. Quote, his last column for the Washington Post appeared on the morning of his death. In it, he reflected on the emotional pain of sending his younger son to college and what being a father had taught him about life. Quote, he'd written, parenthood offers many lessons in patience and sacrifice, but ultimately it is a lesson in humility. The very best thing about your life is a short stage in someone else's story. Is a short stage in someone else's story, and it is enough. I love stories about people who may not be born with great gifts and good looks, but make their one precious life sing anyway. And here is the best little story I know about that. I'm going to finish with it. It's a first-person account told by Angelina Citron. Angelina says, I'm attending a high school cross-country track meet. I'm waiting to see one of my children compete. Right now, they're running the girls' 5K race. Because part of the course is wooded, we lose sight of the runners for much of the competition. 10 minutes into the race, the lead runners emerge from the woods, and the other parents and I stop chatting and we pay attention. As they get closer, I notice that one of the girls in the lead is at least 100 pounds overweight. How is this possible, I wonder? As the runners cross the finish line, the overweight girl veers to the left and continues around the track. She has completed only one lap of the 2-lap race. We'll have to wait for her to finish before the next race can begin. Maybe some parents are thinking about going home, getting home before supper is over. But I'm thinking about that girl out there all alone. How she didn't look at any of us as she passed by in her jersey and shorts. The tension is palpable, and a few spectators make jokes, but mostly it's quiet. I think about the courage it takes for her to keep going. Could I do that? 15 minutes later, the overweight girl comes into view, and her teammates run to her, yelling her name. And as she crosses the finish line, she is surrounded by dozens of cheering fans. I think we can all learn a lesson from that. Because people who finish well at the end of life are most often those who have made a habit of finishing well their whole life long. It's about fighting the good fight. It's about remaining true to ourselves. It's about finishing the race that we begin. Amen.